French army has seized Algeria in its revolt against de Gaulle. More on that later. In Laos, the government's army suffered its worst defeat of the Civil War, evacuating its last stronghold in north-central Laos. Now the communists may want to begin the ceasefire talks.
And I believe that in the 1950s, the United States can once again capture the imagination of the world.
Chicago, the Windy City, is both windy and snowy in the wake of a storm which leaves more than half a foot. Temperatures drop to 0 during the storm. San Francisco gets the heaviest snow in 30 years. Children, many of whom have never seen snow before, are more spellbound than snowbound, but they soon learn what to do with the stuff.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan arrives in Key West, Florida for a conference with the President on the explosive crisis in Laos. They jointly declare determination to prevent the Southeast Asian kingdom from being taken over by communist-supported rebels. Also discussed is Britain's ceasefire proposal to Moscow.
The Soviet Union willing to agree to a ceasefire in Laos?
We touched in conversation this subject. I have nothing to say publicly at this moment.
The look for 61 will recall the Jazz Age, and where Paris leads, the rest of the fashion world is likely to follow.
Here was a new symbol of communist ruthlessness. Overnight, East Berlin became a concentration camp, sealing in the inhabitants of that sector. Barbed wire and cement were the answers to the refugee problem.
Khrushchev repeats his threat to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany, which he claims, wrongly, rights in Berlin.
Served with an order by East German authorities that all U.S. personnel must show identification before entering that section of Berlin, American troops answer with the only language the Reds seem to understand, a show of arms. Castro marks the second anniversary of his revolution with the biggest military parade ever staged in Cuba, featuring tanks and other heavy weapons from Russia and Red Czechoslovakia. Shortly afterwards, Castro demanded the United States Embassy drastically reduce its staff to 11 persons. It was the last straw in his long campaign and harassment.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
The assault has begun on the dictatorship of Fidel Castro. Cuban Army pilots opened the first phase of organized revolt with bombing raids on 3 military bases.
In Havana, Acting Foreign Minister Olivares shows diplomats rockets fired from the Cuban raiders, which he claims have U.S. markings.
These charges are totally false, and I categorically. The United States has committed no aggression against Cuba, and no offensive has been launched from Florida or from any other part of the United States.
Es un honor para mí el estar hoy entre un grupo de los hombres más valientes del mundo.
Castro gloated over his victory and told the world that Cuba was now a socialist nation and would hold no more elections. The next day, the United States officially proclaimed Cuba to be a communist satellite state.
His first great success in space when the Russians pushed a man across the threshold. He was Yuri Gagarin, the astronaut the Russians lionized as the first to... It was the propaganda coup of the year.
Today, this Redstone Mercury is the center of world attention as Lieutenant Commander Shepard walks to the elevator that will carry him 65 feet aloft to the capsule. It's 6:20 a.m., a moment of history. 3, 2, 1, 0. The rocket performs perfectly as it lifts the funnel-shaped capsule gracefully aloft.
115 miles up, he went 300 miles downrange, right on target, and was picked up by waiting helicopters. The triumph of Alan B. Shepard, U.S. space pioneer. As the captain prepared to leave the capsule, explosive bolts on the escape hatch let go, and the Mercury is lost. However, the moon gets closer.
Albany, Georgia. A Negro nation is led by the Reverend Martin Luther King.
And if necessary, we must be willing to fill up the jails all over the state of Georgia.
Солнце. Шар превращается в колоссальный светящийся купол. Яркое свечение еще продолжается. В этом опыте оно длится необычайно долго. Силы напутствуют приходу ударной волны.
Just why the Soviet Union would wish to detonate a megaton explosion, something about which we can all speculate.
At Oxford, integration at the University of Mississippi and crusade. When Air Force veteran James Meredith tries to register, the police lines are drawn, U.S. Marshals blocked. When university officials are cited for contempt of federal court, Governor Ross Barnett Negro applicant. Meredith goes away, and the federal government ponders its next move. The forces increased tenfold and more. It is not enough to avert a night of rioting, leaving 2 dead and the campus the shambles of a battlefield. "75 students and other rioters are arrested. Among those seized, former Major General Edwin Walker, who is charged with insurrection. And James Meredith becomes a duly registered student at the University of Mississippi.
Sir, there's been a great deal of turmoil and conflict. 2 people have been killed. Do you have any feelings of guilt? Have you given it any second thoughts?
I'm very sorry that anyone had to get hurt or killed. But of course, I think that's an unfair question. Any of you believe that I had anything to do with that?
President Kasavubu is taking a Leopoldville on his return from a conference of Congolese leaders in Madagascar, at which it was agreed to convert the republic into a loose confederation. The streets are jammed for a parade in celebration of the decision. But red opposition to the plan is heated, and the pro-Soviet Antoine Gizenga, Lumumba's political heir, still controls key areas and sizable armed forces. The Congo's problems are far from over.
Vienna was a neutral arena for a sparring match between 2 worlds. The men who hold the power to write tomorrow's history met, smiled, and resolved no problems. The dictator and the... the East and the West. St. James Church in the Hudson River hamlet of Hyde Park is the scene of last rites for the First Lady of the World, Eleanor Roosevelt. President Kennedy heads the list of distinguished world leaders who pay last tribute to the beloved woman who is remembered as a humanitarian and one who loved her fellow man.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
From the Cold War, the ground forces of NATO have been alert against the military threat of the communist bloc. Now, Honest John missiles add to NATO's striking power.
President Kennedy begins a tour of 4 space installations at Huntsville, Alabama, where he is greeted by Dr. Werner von Braun, space pioneer and director of this research and development center. The missiles on display are dwarfed by the mighty Saturn rocket. This booster is the first stage of the rocket that will put the 3-man Apollo capsule into a 2-week orbit of the Earth in 1964. Preliminary to a lunar shoot. Gemini, which was developed here, will allow 2 men to orbit the Earth for 2 weeks and will be used for experiments in outer space rendezvous and docking missions. This winds up the President's first-hand look at our space program and our progress in the race for space.
The first deficit comes from a recession. If we can take the proper action in the proper time, it's an important step we can take to prevent another recession. That is the right kind of a tax cut, both for your family budget and the national budget.
Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the peoples of Free China on the island of Taiwan, heads the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the overthrow of the Manchu dynasty. 11 million Chinese, strong with their dream of someday wresting their homeland from the communists, are marking the day that saw the end of 4,000 years of monarchy in China.
Khrushchev declared, through the formation of the world system of socialism, the situation in the world has altered radically. At present, it is not circles whom. On December 2nd, 1961, Castro reveals, I am a Marxist-Leninist and will be one until the day I die. Socialism is a word. There is no halfway between socialism and imperialism.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Communism's adventure in Cuba is a sophisticated one. Political, psychological, subversive, with paramilitary features. Can a democratic society, wherein the right to know and the value of knowing are basic, can a democratic society wage successful political, psychological, subversive warfare against communism?
Leather is falling into step in the fall fashion parade. Finished in an explosion of rainbow colors, leather has been styled into smocks and sheath-top skirts like this eye-stopping pair. Just the thing for a day's outing at Sterling Forest Gardens in New York.
In Trafalgar Square, 2,000 Londoners demonstrate against the United States blockade.
Fidel Castro whips up a furor in Cuba, charging the United States with arming and training mercenary forces for an imminent invasion. He calls out some 200,000 militiamen for training and guard duty at key points throughout Havana. Khrushchev happily receives a gift of the Cuban flag as he lines up with a solid endorsement for the home-brewed anti-Americanism of Fidel Castro, the Soviet sole Western Hemisphere ally.
As he arrives back in Washington, the president hears more bad news. China has just invaded India. Is this part of a two-pronged communist assault? Now the president must weigh all the factors one final time, then make his decision, knowing that whatever he does, he risks nuclear war.
Meanwhile, the United States continues to reinforce its Cuban base at Guantanamo Bay, the naval depot that Castro wants the U.S. to give up. These Marines have been assigned the job of protecting the base against any Cuban threats that might arise during the present crisis.
Mr. President, I am submitting today a resolution to the Security Council designed to find a way out of this calamitous situation. This resolution calls, as an interim measure under Article 40 of the Charter, for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal from Cuba of all missile and other offensive weapons.
The inauguration of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th President of the United States is reenacted in the nation's capital 100 years after the event. There's a crowd larger than the original president this day, double the 10,000 of 1861. And the bright balmy day is in marked contrast to the gloomy overcast of a century ago. Scenes familiar from history books and movies come to life at the Capitol as Mr. Lincoln arrives. He is portrayed.
The following is the letter which has just been dispatched from the President to Chairman Khrushchev. I think that you and I, with our heavy responsibilities for the maintenance of peace, were aware that developments were approaching a point where events could have become unmanageable. So I welcome this message and consider it an important contribution to peace.
It urgently recommends that the United States and the Soviet Union confer promptly on measures to remove the existing threat to the security of the Western Hemisphere and the peace of the world, and to report thereon to the Security Council.
Earlier today, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara announced that yesterday's photographic surveillance of Cuba indicated that the bases were being dismantled.
But with increased United States aid and instruction, Vietnam soldiers learned to fight back against the communist Viet Cong. Helicopters become a crucial weapon against guerrillas who strike, then disappear will-o'-the-wisp in marshes. Southeast Asia and Berlin are not the only hazard areas in the orchestrated struggle of the Cold War. There is Cuba, from which Bay of Pigs invaders hobble back when their ransom is paid.
The President visits the big missile center at Vandenberg Air Force Base. He becomes the nation's first president to see an intercontinental ballistic missile fired when an Atlas D blasts off its pad to roar down the Pacific Missile Range in a perfect launch.
it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I do not run for the presidency merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies.
So it just seems to me what is required in the United States is not what Vice President Humphrey has said, which is the politics of joy and the politics of happiness, but the politics of reality, of what the problems are in the country. I mean, it's all fine that we have all of these. Thank you. You come with me.
January 1968, the Tet Offensive. Suddenly, the enemy finds new strength to strike, denying all American tales of progress.
Vietnam is wrecked by battle. Saigon is scorched.
United States bombers continued their raids against the North. Our military called the attacks necessary, but Hanoi said that no peace talks could begin until the bombing stopped.
In Morocco's capital city of Rabat, crowds estimated at over 1 million jammed the route of the funeral procession of King Mohammed V. His son and heir, King Hassan, and Tunisian President Bourguiba helped carry the bier.
When finally Vice Premier Key had to go on the air to announce a general curfew throughout the city and the imposition of martial law, he had to do it on the American Armed Forces radio station because his own Saigon radio station had been blown to pieces.
We have ordered our aircraft and our naval vessels to make no attacks on North except in the area north of the demilitarized zone where the continuing enemy buildup directly threatens Allied forward position.
The North Vietnamese would talk. Gabriel Harriman. With Marshal...
But now, in March, his generals report they need 200,000 more men in Vietnam. They war our fellow citizens, their warm and precious lives pledged to a cause that many of their countrymen wish to yield. Courage to persist is of the essence of a leader. Courage to stop sometimes takes greater will.
For the 8th day in a row, fighting continues here in the Cholan district.
Now, since the communist offensive, almost every city and town in South Vietnam is cut off from the others.
President Thieu of South Vietnam said that advocates a coalition government for his nation is a traitor. That it will give North Vietnam a total of $45 million in aid and long-term credits.
The minority chants its protest.
I say that when respect for the United States has fallen all over the world, but when it has fallen so low that a fourth-rate military power will hijack an American naval vessel in international waters, then it's time for new leadership for the American people at home, and we should provide.
10, 9, we have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have clear the top.
Tower clear, 13 seconds.
Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston.
Apollo 8, over.
Hello, Apollo 8. Loud and clear.
Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
That's affirmative. You're the best ones to know.
As Borman, Lovell, and Anders stepped onto the carrier deck, a huge and patriotic celebration broke loose in Mission Control, echoed by the hundreds of thousands of men and women who were Apollo 8.
Step on the moon. What do you think of it?
I can't believe in how short, just 8 years, how long we just made us. We beat the Russians and everything. I can't believe it, that it just happened. And we can see it in our lifetime. And how much we'll probably see, you know, without my whole lifetime, more.
Nowhere is the grotesque nature of more vivid than in Washington. For the first time since the Civil War, soldiers must defend the Capitol. Machine guns turned upon Americans whose laws no longer bind.
Люди прочтут в газетах, услышат по радио, как космический корабль пилотирует разгонение советского союза.
The feeling that I had when I won the Olympics was a feeling so proud and just wanting to belong to the country. And it's the most wonderful feeling anyone could ever have.
The tragic news from Czechoslovakia shocks the conscience of the world. The Soviet Union and its allies have invaded a defenseless country to stamp out a resurgence of ordinary human freedom. It is a sad commentary on the communist mind that a sign of liberty in Czechoslovakia is deemed a fundamental threat to the security of the Soviet system. The excuse...
Nejsilnější jsou u předsednictva vlády, které bylo obsazeno nejprve. Násilím byl odsud vyvlečen premiér Černý. Těla rozmístěná v parcích míří i na Pražský hrad. Tam v těchto chvílích tlí prezident republiky Ludvík Svoboda, který zhruba před 25 lety bojoval v Čechách. I když už po 2. hodině noční, například ředitele spojů Hoffmana, byly vypnuty vysílače. Později se však statečným spojařům podařilo spojit a rozhlas mohl vysílat dál zprávy o napadení Československa.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Nixon chooses Chicago to open his assault on Humphrey in September. There, where only 1 week earlier streets and parks were battleground, the Republican draws 400,000 people. A triumphal first week carries him from Chicago to San Francisco and back across the land. Buoyant, wherever he campaigns, he underscores his message.
The nerve center for is Levant. It's been transformed by radio antennas, bunkers, and barbed wire into the enemy's command post. On the airstrip at Lafang, tons of artillery and ammunition are loaded and moved out to forward fire bases. The objective, to hit the enemy anywhere between Da Nang and the DMZ and west into Laos again if necessary.
The Marines and airborne advanced into the communist lines. Fired at each target prior to the attack, allowing the populace a chance to escape.
American youth today has its fringes, but that's part of the greatness of our country. I have great faith in American youth. The youth of today can change the world, and if they understand that, I think that we're going to go forward to a great age, not just for Americans, but for peace and progress for all the people in the world.
This game depends, however, on his unwritten alliance with Reagan. Announcing open candidacy, Reagan now speeds from caucus to caucus. If Reagan can persuade his Southern friends to break their prior pledges to Nixon, the convention will come apart.
NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, presents Aeronautics and Space Report.
At Christmas time, the crew of the USS Pueblo returned home after nearly a year of captivity in North Korea. Hooker and his crew were met by relatives in San Diego. After a tearful reunion, the men unfolded a tale of torture at the hands of the communists bent on extracting confessions. Weeks of probing lay ahead, but for the Pueblo crew, it was a time for rejoicing and sorrow. Grief for the one shipmate.
Astronauts Neil A. Armstrong, Edwin E. Aldrin, and Michael Collins, the three men who will make the next and most historic round trip to the moon.
The men rose early, ate breakfast, and dressed in their spacesuits.
The weekly military casualty figures were released today in Saigon. 11 Americans were killed in combat, 20 were wounded. More than 900 South Vietnamese soldiers were killed and more than 3,200 South Vietnamese wounded.
In one important aspect, the offensive has backfired badly on the North Vietnamese. It has harmed them politically inside South Vietnam. For the first time, there is a remarkable degree of political solidarity in the country. President Thieu is firmly in control. The only criticism has come from opposition leaders who felt they had to say something to protect their positions. Even they have not blamed Thieu for the communist successes. President Thieu's position is still largely dependent on the support he gets from Washington. He is the American choice to run Vietnam.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We are certifying the 26th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
That amendment, as you know, provides for the right to vote of all of our young people between 18 and 21. 11 million new voters as a result of this amendment.
A massive shock rippling out of the mountains just north of the San Fernando Valley. Hitting here, missing there, but shaking most of Southern California. Fires everywhere.
I think Pete's absolutely right about this medical job. This is the first time we've ever had the space to really adequately test a guy up there to see how he behaves under zero gravity for long periods. So we really don't know what's going to happen to the guy in the long term. And this is probably, to my mind, the single most important thing that we've got to do in Total Skylab is find out whether man himself does have a future in space in terms of making long journeys to somewhere else.
Now people are beginning to pick up the pieces.
What are you looking for down there?
All sorts of things like spoons, forks, and knives, parts of mirrors, parts of plates, razor blades.
Have you found anything?
Yep, money, spoons, razor blades.
How much money did you find?
$4.98.
How long are you going to keep digging?
Till I have to go home.
I will only say that I've had some experience, and a great deal of experience, as a matter of fact, in this past year in dealing with communist leaders. I find that making a bargain with them is not easy. And you get something from them only when you have something they want to get from you. The only way we're going to get our POWs back is to be doing something to them, and that means hitting military targets in North Vietnam, a residual force in South Vietnam, and continuing the mining of the harbors in North Vietnam.
Apollo 16 lifts America back into space and gives our astronauts a dune buggy tour of lunar land.
Okay. I think that it's interesting to consider what Margaret Mead said about women who are honored in authority in this country. She said that, in fact, widows are the only such women, because what you have to do is be married to a man who has a certain position, live out your role of child and housekeeping, then, through no fault of yours, he dies, and then alone is it all right for you to take over his job. We've decided that that's awfully hard on the men.
Señor presidente, hermoso espectáculo de niños en brazos de sus madres. Aquí están dos jóvenes madres con dos hermosas niñas que las abrazan.
At this rally in Silver Spring, Maryland, Governor Wallace's campaign is crushed by violence. Arthur Bremer, seen applauding a 21-year-old busboy, uses the cover of the crowd and the confusion to get close enough to the candidate for an attempted assassination.
Today was the critical operation for the governor to remove a bullet lodged near his spinal column and to find out whether the bullet had cut his spine. A controversial day in politics. A man arrested trying to bug the offices of the Democratic National Committee in Washington turns out to be an employee of President Richard Nixon's re-election campaign committee. And perhaps a significant day for the Vietnam peace negotiations. The president of the Soviet Union has left Hanoi, saying they will resume soon.
Mother Nature unleashes the fury of Hurricane Agnes across 4 states: Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. 134 lives are lost. Thousands are homeless. It runs into the millions.
I can assure you that as Secretary General of this organization, I am deeply worried about this development. It is extremely serious. And it is for this reason that I decided on my own, I want to stress this, to put this question of terrorism and acts of violence on the agenda of the next General Assembly.
Next stop, Moscow. Purpose, a summit meeting between President Nixon and Soviet leaders Brezhnev and Kosygin. Agreement is reached on limitations of nuclear weapons, the sale of American wheat to the Soviets, and a trade of beverages, our soft drinks for their vodka. Another victory for personal diplomacy on a global scale.
In a field 4 miles from London Airport. The tail section was intact, but the body of the plane was demolished.
With the Paris peace talks stalled, the Vietnam War worsens. Responding to a devastating Viet Cong offensive, President Nixon orders new measures.
All entrances to North Vietnamese ports will be mined to prevent access to these ports and North Vietnamese naval operations from these ports.
But Gordon, he was in Hanoi apparently to talk about a new peace effort. He said and that the Soviet Union will do everything it can to bring about a de-escalation of the Vietnam War.
Paris continues to be the focal point of world attention. American negotiators arrive for another in a long series of peace talks with the North Vietnamese. Presidential aide Henry Kissinger, a key figure in the lengthy and complex conferences, sounds a premature note of hope. We believe
federal indictments Washington today in the Watergate bugging affair.
In spite of the increased security, West Germany continues to offer political asylum to hijackers from communist countries. Just last week, the West German government refused to return 10 Czechoslovakians who killed a pilot during their hijack escape to the West.
As you know, I will soon be visiting the People's Republic of China, the Soviet Union. I go there with no illusions. We have great differences with both powers. We shall continue to have great differences. But peace depends on the ability of great powers to live together on the same planet despite their differences. We would not be true to our obligation to generations yet unborn if we failed to seize this moment to do everything in our power to ensure that we will be able to talk about those differences rather than to fight about them in the future.
Peking, historic site for an unprecedented meeting between East and West. Responding to a special invitation, President and Mrs. Nixon arrive. Fly is on hand to extend an official welcome to the presidential couple. It's Mr. Nixon's initial move toward his self-proclaimed goal, a generation of peace. A confident president, anxious to end the diplomatic freeze between the United States and China. Mao. Top aide Henry Kissinger joins the talks with Premier Zhou Enlai on Vietnam and East-West trade. The First Lady views giant pandas, a gift of the People's Republic. Personal presidential diplomacy tentatively parts the bamboo curtain.
his condemnation of U.S. military actions in Vietnam and revealing he brought back assurances from Hanoi about the release of American prisoners of war.
Including the foreign minister, talked for well over an hour with the prime minister, 2 hours and 45 minutes with the foreign minister. Both verbal and written assurances about the prisoners.
Clarence Kelly, the president's choice to be permanent head of the FBI, cleared the Senate Judiciary Committee today. We'll have reports tonight on the economy, and we'll see what happened to a fat man who had part of his insides cut out in an effort to be a thin man.
Massive crowds take to the streets of the Egyptian capital. Euphoria. After 5 lean years, there are signs that Egypt is about to stand on its own feet. They are cheering this man. It was then that President Anwar Sadat dropped his diplomatic bomb. He announced that the Russians had been asked to withdraw their Egyptian soil after nearly a decade of Soviet-Egyptian cooperation.
Televised violence can increase aggressive tendencies in some children. We will have to manage our program.
I congratulate you for that statement.
Ballot of the International Olympic Committee. Out of 70 ballots, 36 were to withdraw the invitation to the Rhodesian team, 31 were for maintaining it, and 3 were blank. This means the invitation to the Rhodesian team to participate in the games of the 20th Olympiad has been withdrawn.
The Rhodesians left angry. Representatives of Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda were jubilant. The expulsion of Rhodesia culminated a campaign that saw American black athletes pledge to walk out with the Africans. Now their teams, they say, will unpack their suitcases, give up their threatened boycott, and the Summer Olympics can go on.
Munich houses the Olympic flame as athletes from all over the globe.
The director of Central Intelligence testified today that the CIA engaged in widespread mind control experiments in the 1950s and 60s and said that efforts are now being made to notify people who were unwitting guinea pigs. Stansfield Turner, the head of the CIA, said he found those programs totally abhorrent. 185 private researchers were used in 80 different institutions, including universities, chemical companies, and hospitals, many without knowledge of CIA involvement.
The senators heard CIA Director Stansfield Turner's explanation of how the old documents on CIA drug tests had been discovered in a records.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
As President, I am also determined to maintain America's leadership in space. The first great era of space exploration as an initiative, unprecedented. But the second era of the space shuttle, when we follow the great benefits that have been made possible by that exploration, is about to begin.
Enterprise was the first production craft of the Space Shuttle program and was used in the first flight test program at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The Enterprise will be making a low pass over Montreal tomorrow. Its flight over Montreal is part of the 3-day goodwill visit to Canada, arranged by NASA in recognition of Canada's cooperation with the U.S. in its space program. Unlike its sister spacecraft Columbia and Challenger, Enterprise was never in an Earth orbit. Instead, it was used to study the orbiter's flying and landing qualities and aerodynamic properties during airborne glide tests. When the Space Shuttle circles tomorrow afternoon, she'll be flying piggyback aboard a modified Boeing 747 jet.
J. Edgar Hoover FBI building houses the Bureau's Washington headquarters. Supporting local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI makes available the most scientific and proficient crime-fighting capabilities ever developed.
I never have to ask around to know what's right for me. I like my fun, I like my friends who keep me company. And when I want some cooling down or picking up, you see, I don't have to think about what to drink, 'cause milk's the one for me.
Milk is the one. Gives me the cold, fresh taste I like, the lift I like.
I don't have to think about what to drink, 'cause milk's the one for me.
Unit with emergency, go ahead. We have spotted a tornado. It's in Green Township. It is really big. Willfleet and Creek, a house exploded. 460. Creek and Plainfield is a shambles. 962, go ahead. This whole neighborhood, Hutchison Road, has been wiped out. Wires, poles, and power down. You better send everything you can get over here. Everything we got's rolling, 962.
In the morning.
We had a tornado. That would be the understatement of the year.
Oh my goodness. In fact, it's like 100,000 tons of bombs.
Of course, you know by now that Elvis Presley died yesterday. Later today, his body will lie in state at his home, Graceland, in Memphis, Tennessee.
Earlier this week, Democratic congressional leaders urged President Carter to push their reform proposals for a while. They were unsuccessful, as Marilyn Berger now reports from the White House.
After Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary Joseph Califano met with President Carter this morning, he said the administration will present its proposals for welfare reform this week, as planned.
The President's program is going to be as he's promised. It'll be very pro-work, it'll be very pro-family, it'll be very anti-fraud and anti-abuse.
Just days before the message is to go to Congress, a final picture is emerging of what the proposals will contain. The program will require no additional cost during the first year. Work incentives will be provided, but there's no sign there will be enough work to get a large number of people off welfare quickly. Income supplements to the working poor will be determined by both salary and family size. Mothers will not be required to work if their children are under the age of 14. States will receive some financial relief to help pay for welfare programs. How much is not known. Influential congressmen have warned the president that many of these proposals are highly controversial and that action this year is very unlikely.
With the exception of preventing war, this is the greatest challenge that our country will face during our lifetime. The energy crisis has not yet overwhelmed us, but it will if we do not act quickly. It's a problem that we will not be able to solve in the next few years, and it's likely to get progressively worse through the rest of this century. We must not be selfish or timid if we hope to have a decent world for our children and our grandchildren. We simply must balance our demand for energy with our rapidly shrinking resources. By acting now, we can control our future instead of
one process.
As a matter of fact, it's in the tri-state area of Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, there are 1.8 trillion barrels of oil in place. and that the recoverable oil from those deposits is probably of the order of 600 billion barrels. Now, this is more oil here in these deposits that is calculated to be recoverable than the deposits of the entire world.
The two areas where we waste most of our energy are transportation and our heating and cooling systems. Transportation consumes 26% of all our energy, and as much as half of that is waste. We simply must.
One energy idea that is here today is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a stockpile of oil stored in underground caverns called salt domes. These reserves are like money in the bank, to be drawn on when needed. Maurice Graber, the Department of Energy.
The cavern will hold about 16 million barrels of oil. The 5 caverns on this complex will store about 60 million as they now exist. The major purpose of the oil storage program is to stockpile a reservoir of oil which will be available in case a shortage develops for any reason.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It failed. His doctor pronounced him dead at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
During the night, one of the jets belonging to Presley brought his former wife, Priscilla, and their daughter, Lisa Marie, to Memphis from California.
You well, not particularly. I think after reading the books, I don't think at first, initially, I thought it was going to be damaging, but after I read 4 polygraph books, and it didn't seem all that damaging because it's not all that exact. And once you read a book, you can't beat the test, but you can keep them from beating you. For instance, you can learn how to breathe as normal and things like that.
2 unmanned spacecraft, Voyager 1 and 2, lifted off from Cape Canaveral atop Titan Centaur rockets. Traveling uninterrupted through interstellar space, the Voyagers will endure forever, long after everything man has ever built has crumbled into dust. In the event the spacecraft encounter alien intelligence, both Voyagers carry a copper phonograph record, a message, celebrating the sights and sounds of Earth.
And friendly wishes.
These unique discs contain photographs of everyday life, as well as voices, offering greetings in 55 languages. There are also animal noises, the music of Beethoven and Chuck Berry, a baby crying, laughter, rain, and a
simple as can be. Skateboard safety is simple. Never ride in the street, and before you take off, put on your gloves, elbow and knee pads, and helmet. It's no fun to wipe out, but if you do, you'll be protected. Safety gear. More fun on wheels.
There's a key, and it makes it just as simple as can be. Guard your elbows, head, hands, and knees. Do it for your own security.
It helps a lot.
It's the key.
Just in case.
It's the key.
And the shuttle Columbia is due to return to Earth later today, and the operating, but there is a potential problem. The hydraulic system is broken down, forcing Columbia to rely on backup systems.
To tell you the story of these activities, we are professing to tell you the complete story that we know. Right. But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of
The buildings behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Services. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began.
The shaper and molder of OSS was General Wild Bill Donovan. He said of his group's work, "We may have made mistakes, but we were not afraid to try things that were never done before." In this anything-goes atmosphere, Donovan appointed this man, Stanley Lovell, a Boston industrialist, to break new scientific and technical fields. Donovan called Lovell his Dr. Moriarty, after the fiendish professor in Sherlock Holmes. Lovell liked the name and posed for this Saturday Evening Post photo. He later wrote of his OSS job that it was, quote, to stimulate the Peck's bad boy beneath the surface of every American scientist and to say to him, throw all of your normal law-abiding concepts out of... Here's a chance to raise merry hell. It was in this atmosphere that the search for mind control...
CIA Director Turner said such tests stopped years ago. He said he found it abhorrent to use human beings as guinea pigs.
In this note from White's diaries, it says, call Lovell regarding TD. TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana.
The Mardi Gras crisis continued today in New Orleans. Festivities in the city itself have been canceled because the police are on strike, although some parades are being held in the suburbs. A judge ordered the police back to work, but so far the police have ignored the court order.
The big Mardi Gras parades would normally go through the city. This year, because of the police strike, most were moved to the suburbs.
Near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, an accident at a nuclear power plant. A spokesman said that a feed water pump broke down this morning, automatically shutting down the 3-mile nuclear power plant. Some radiated steam escaped into the atmosphere before the plant could be sealed off, but officials said there is no threat to health. The plant is 10 miles southeast of Harrisburg.
Within minutes after notification of the reactor accident at 3 Mile Island, the resources of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission began to deploy to the plant site. Personnel and equipment began to arrive at the site, located on the Susquehanna River, to monitor the reactor and to evaluate the physical and radiation hazards to the surrounding communities.
This means it is now considered safe for pregnant women and preschool children to return to their homes within a 5-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island site.
In Britain, truck drivers are expected to end a 27-day-long strike. They will get a pay raise of almost 21%, and that is far above the government's anti-inflation ceiling.
Thursdays after class, we usually go out to eat. Helen would always drink. Later, she would pick her daughter up at school and drive home. One day, there was a terrible accident. Well, what could I have done?
If your friend has too much to drink, don't let her drive. Call a cab. Drive her yourself. We've got to start taking care of each other. That's what friends are for.
I didn't want to insult her. I didn't...
Maintaining peace, or at least an uneasy calm in the world, is the Security Council's raison d'etre and one of the United Nations functions. As a delegate once observed,
the Security Council, Mr. President, is the most prestigious and authoritative of the organs of the United Nations. It is endowed by the Charter with the capacity to take mandatory decisions. But our esteem for this body derives not only from the binding character of its authority. We are endeared to the Council because of the...
In England, it's all over now except for the concession. The Conservative Party of Margaret Thatcher has won the most seats in Britain's Parliament, and Mrs. Thatcher is apparently to be the first woman Prime Minister in that country, and in all of Europe, for that matter.
James Callaghan's Labour government is out. The Tories are in, with the first majority government in 5 years. Margaret Thatcher, nicknamed the Iron Lady, becomes Britain's first woman in the top job.
as having an entirely, what you would call a middle-class approach. I call it a fundamentally conservative approach with a small c, because it's founded on belief in the dignity of the human personality.
This picture of devastation in an open field a half-mile northwest of Chicago's O'Hare Airport is all that remains of the worst aviation accident in U.S. history.
A temporary morgue has been set up in an American Airlines hangar. Pathology disaster team are working on the grim identification process, but they say that
SALT II, signed but never ratified, the embrace broken by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
A dummy in the front seat of a car going 30 miles an hour. Watch what happens when the car stops. Now the dummy's wearing a lap belt with lap and shoulder belts. See the difference? I thought these films might help you decide what to do the next time you get in your car. Well, we know safety belts are a real headache, but look at it this way. Your headache could be...
Information is actually a deliberately distorted or manipulated information that is leaked into the communication system of the opponent with the expectation that it would be accepted as genuine information and influence either the decision-making process, for example, or to influence or manipulate public opinion.
La désinformation, ce n'est pas simplement le mensonge.
Disinformation is not simply lies or false. It is the art of having your enemies say what you want them to say. This consists in conditioning Western journalists by the USSR in such a way that in perfectly good faith, or sometimes for different reasons, even sometimes financial reasons, these journalists would write what the Soviet Union would like them to write. After which, TASS takes their text and says, you see, even the Western press is saying this. Active measures, and these go even further, consist in making up completely false documents which they try to have distributed as authentic Western documents. Techniques have enormous importance in the strategy of mental destabilization of the West by the Soviet Union.
Mentale de l'Occident par l'Union soviétique.
At the moment, the Soviets are involved in active measures all over the world and practically in any country of the world. The number of operations which they are running can be counted only in thousands.
After an hour and 10 minutes, Mr. Carter left the hospital wearing a figure-8 harness to keep his shoulders erect and a sling on his left arm. Tonight, the White House said Mr. Carter had fractured his left collarbone and is taking medication for his considerable pain.
Many had come for Disco Demolition Night, a promotional gimmick. Between games, as planned, a huge box containing thousands of disco records was blown up. The rest was unplanned. Fans stormed out onto the field and the disco records were hurled like frisbees. Bonfires were set, bottles were thrown. The batting cage was torn down and destroyed. Fistfights broke out. White Sox players had to be locked in their clubhouse for their own protection. The melee lasted an hour and a half and resulted in 39 arrests and a few minor injuries.
The Soviet Union had just made a massive arms deal with Iraq and was pouring large quantities of the most modern equipment into Iraq. I had already had an arms arrangement with Syria. That is a criticism that is, and that one should reflect about, the lack of understanding of the impact of economic change on political changes. That is a lesson we ought to learn for the future.
No direct contact has ever been had, as far as I know, between the United States government officially and the Ayatollah directly. They were unified only on one negative conclusion, and that was no.
These machines not only verify the number of bills, but also detect any possible counterfeits. Many things can earmark weight, color, size, or poor detail in artwork. Once identified, it is cataloged, then sent off to the Secret Service for investigation.
Or any American to do, keep out of our country and we will run it ourselves. Over.
Two relief wells are being drilled to divert the flow of oil and eventually shut it off. One relief well is less than 1,200 feet from its target. Oil officials say if it's successful, the world's biggest oil spill could be over in less than a month, whether the cone works or not.
We will get more right now to the practice.
Earlier today, President Carter watched the latest broadcast of the Iranian hostages. He made little comment. They are not free, said Mr. Carter, and that is the most important thing.
Today's greetings had a somewhat sadder tone than the film released yesterday.
I think through the trials and tribulations I'm sure to come, all of us hostages are proud to be Americans.
Up. 60 years of work by the Save the Children Fund. It must have seemed such a simple title in 1919 to our founder, Eglantine Jebb. It was a cry from the heart, which was answered with such enthusiasm and efficiency that in the following 60 years, the fund has never lost sight of the simple, basic principles that Miss Jebb instilled to help the children of Eastern Europe after the First World War.
Story out of Cincinnati this morning, a bizarre tragedy. 11 people killed when a rock concert crowd went out of control.
A huge crowd waiting for general admission seats suddenly surged toward entrance doors, the people elbowing and kicking each other. Many were pushed under and the crowd stampeded over them. 11 died. A report by...
It just went crazy. There was a girl in front of me. She fell down and people were stamping on top of her and everything, and I was trying to help her up and they were just hitting everybody and just trying to kill to get into the concert.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ronald Reagan.
Good evening. I'm here tonight
to announce my intention to seek the Republican nomination for president. You know, someone once said that the difference between an American and any other kind of person is that an American lives in anticipation of the future because he knows it'll be a great place. Other people fear the future as just a repetition of... And tragically, as the cost of living keeps going up, the standard of living, which has been our great pride, keeps going down. The people have not created this disaster in our economy. The federal government has. It has overspent, overestimated, and overregulated. It has failed to deliver services within the revenue it should be allowed. As president, I would use every power at my command to make the federal establishment respond to the will and the collective wishes of the people. We must force the entire federal bureaucracy to live in the real world of reduced spending, streamlined function, and accountability. I cannot and will not stand by while inflation and joblessness destroy the dignity of... During a time when the Soviet Union may enjoy nuclear superiority over this country, we must never waver in our commitment to our allies, nor accept any negotiation which is not clearly in the national interest. We must judge carefully. Though we should leave no initiative untried in our pursuit of peace, we must be clear-voiced in our resolve to resist any unpeaceful act wherever it may occur. Negotiation with the Soviet Union must never become appeasement.
If the auto industry can't do it, government researchers will. The Department of Transportation today unveiled what it is calling the safety car. It says it hopes it will all be driving it in the 1980s. DOT says the car gets more than 30 miles to a gallon of gas and is safe in a crash at speeds up to 50 miles an hour.
A mid-size prototype car developed for the U.S. Department of Transportation. It averages 32 miles a gallon, can take a head-on crash at 50 miles an hour without injury to the occupants, and can be produced for less than $6,000.
You've got a great demand now for fuel economy cars, and so we're saying to them fuel economy will sell. They've always doubted that before. Now, with the shifts that are occurring, it will sell. I think they will build them. And the technology in this vehicle is not technology that is impossible at all. It can be done, and I'm hopeful that by 1985 to 1990, it will be.
If Americans were driving cars as safe and fuel efficient as this one, traffic deaths could be cut in half, and the country could almost eliminate its need for imported oil.
Meanwhile, the Soviets not only ignored President Carter's withdrawal deadline yesterday, their invasion force is said to be growing. The U.S. Olympic Committee is going to go ahead and pick a Summer Olympics team, whether the team goes to Moscow for the Games or not, and it looks like Americans will not be going.
I'd rather boycott the Olympics today than have to go to war against the Soviets tomorrow.
As they rejected Mr. Carter's call for a boycott, the 16 Olympic committees also rejected an American and British proposal calling for a series of alternate games.
As you know, there is a big debate boiling up around the country. Should we not boycott the Moscow Olympics because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan?
President Carter's tough line against the Soviets in his State of the Union speech produced a lot of news today. The Russians talked of a return to the Cold War.
It's not enough for you to be a kind of protester to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan.
No, I've always felt that political things should be kept out of sports, and I was very disappointed when they didn't this time.
We've been told all along that this operation was not likely to succeed. Therefore, we were led to believe it would not occur. I think if they had talked with us, we would have consulted and advised them, as I did this weekend at a conference, not to undertake this kind of an operation because of the high risk involved and the risk of failure, which would be calamitous to us.
At Arlington National Cemetery today, 3 American Air Force men who died on that raid were buried with full honors.
Coming up on our next half hour, Pete Rose will be talking about his record-breaking hitting streak, and Ronnie Millsap, country music's entertainer of the year, whose hits come in gold and platinum. But right now, a station break.
Governor, are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am.
If you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me, I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now, I congratulate you, sir.
Before departing the Capitol, the President pauses to review troops from all services under the command of Major General Robert Arter, Chairman of the Armed Forces Inaugural Committee.
There is a sense of awe at the scientific achievement that has been accomplished in England with the birth, the healthy, apparently, birth of the first test tube baby, a baby girl delivered by cesarean section last night.
It was the first American baby successfully conceived outside her mother's body by the in vitro technique, in which the mother's egg is fertilized in a laboratory dish with sperm from the father.
Luncheon hosted by the inaugural committee in Statuary Hall of the Capitol. President Reagan brings tremendous news to the guests.
With thanks to Almighty God, I have been given a tagline, the get-off line that everyone wants for the end of a toast or a speech or anything else. Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
Though there were no presidents or generals or the former hostages agreed that today's celebrations of their return were the sweetest.
And finally this evening, Ali returns. Muhammad Ali, once known as Cassius Clay, a veteran of 60 contests in the ring, getting older now, pushing 40, and taking a big chance. Tomorrow night in the Bahamas, Ali takes on a heavyweight champion who is 11 years his junior.
Muhammad Ali and Trevor Berbick, the British Commonwealth heavyweight champion, weighed in today in Nassau for their 10-round non-title bout tomorrow night. Ali weighs 236 pounds, the heaviest he's ever been for a fight.
The United States and the Soviet Union began their latest round of arms talks this morning in Geneva.
The United States has said it will not deploy the new version of this Pershing missile and new cruise missiles if the Soviets dismantle their medium-range arsenal. The Soviets say the United States has deliberately not counted submarine-fired missiles, air-based warheads, and the nuclear forces of Britain and France.
Judy, I'm sorry to interrupt. I beg your pardon. In front of me now are two bulletins from AP and United Press International that both say President Reagan was shot in the chest and wounded by a at the Washington Hotel on Monday. He was reported in stable condition at George Washington University Hospital. I've just read from the United Press International bulletin. The second bulletin is from Associated Press. They both move simultaneously. AP says, quote, President Reagan was wounded in an assassination attempt today, top White House aides said. He was reported to be conscious. His condition was stable, according to Lynn Nofziger, who is the president's political advisor. Here's the car pulling up under the emergency marquee at GW. Agents running out, ordering the press back. There's Mrs. Reagan in the red coat.
Good evening. Reagan is in good condition tonight in a Washington hospital after several hours of emergency surgery. His press secretary, James Brady, is in extremely serious condition with brain damage. A Secret Service agent who was also shot is doing well, while a District of Columbia policeman is in serious condition with bullet wounds in the shoulder and the neck.
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so.
What is the...
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him.
Before he got the news about Brady, the president continued to make jokes with the medical staff. At one point, he said, if I got this much attention in Hollywood, I never would have left.
I think every ball club in the major leagues, really has been hurt financially by this. No one has won by this strike. The only people that are going to win now are the fans because it's over with.
It's about time to stop playing baseball.
Let's begin with the news of the morning. The strike deadline has... It looks like the first mid-season baseball strike in history is on.
Don't like what they're making here, throw them in a steel mill for 6 months and let them earn their money.
President Reagan has reaffirmed close relations with Israel in spite of the suspension of delivery of 4 F-16s after the air raid Sunday on an Iraqi nuclear facility.
Take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means. So.
Tonight, to celebrate the end of the Prince's bachelorhood, there was an enormous and spectacular fireworks display in Hyde Park. And all over England, Scotland, and Wales, bonfires of celebration were lit.
But then the new art form gets a boost when a 24-hour station called MTV debuts.
What we've introduced with MTV is a non-narrative form, as opposed to conventional television where you rely on we rely on mood and emotion. We make you feel a certain way as opposed to you walking away with any particular knowledge.
Helms said his agency could not rehire any large number of strikers because they wouldn't get along with the group now working in the towers.
Within the FAA, we could not accept it under any condition.
As far as coming back as controllers, things, I just don't feel like we need them back down here.
Early this morning, the Canadian Air Traffic Controllers Union claimed that U.S. airspace was unsafe and refused to handle planes on their way to and from the U.S. What followed was temporary havoc, confusion.
I must tell those who failed to report for duty this morning, they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
Negotiations continue to end the Major League Baseball strike, but there's no sign a settlement is near. While they wait, ball players occupy themselves in many ways.
In an historic first, Sandra Day O'Connor is Reagan's surprise choice for nomination to the United States Supreme Court. The Arizona judge shares the president's conservative on many legal issues. She is unanimously confirmed by the Senate in September and takes her place on the bench.
NATO's policy of peace is based on restraint and balance. No NATO weapons, conventional or nuclear,
will ever be used in Europe except in response to attack. NATO's defense plans have been responsible and restrained. But the momentum of the continuing Soviet military buildup threatens both the conventional and the nuclear balance. Our response to this relentless buildup of Soviet military power has been restrained but firm. We have made decisions to strengthen all three legs of the strategic triad: land and air-based. In other words, a deterrent, preventing the use of these Soviet weapons by the counter threat of a like response against their own territory. At present, however, there is no equivalent deterrent to these Soviet intermediate missiles. War depends on the perceived ability of our forces to. The more effective our forces are, the less likely it is that we have to use them. The United States is prepared to cancel its deployment of Pershing II and ground-launched missiles if the Soviets will dismantle their SS-20, SS-4, and SS-5 missiles. This would be an historic step. With Soviet agreement, we could together substantially reduce the dread threat of nuclear war which hangs over the people of Europe. This, like the first footstep on the moon, would be a giant step for mankind.
Citizen of that country, for instance, in this case.
That's what happened to you, right?
That's right.
And you got all this from Moscow when you were trained as a spy at a spy school in Moscow?
That's right. That's right. That was a major part of my schooling.
They live as citizens of these countries, and they would start operating really in case of war between the Soviet Union and the United States, for example, or in the time of of a very serious crisis when, for example, the diplomatic relations would be broken.
Eventually, he was caught by the FBI and became a double agent.
When you were caught by the FBI, did you try to signal your Soviet handlers at the UN or in Moscow that you had been caught?
Not immediately, because I couldn't. I would be, among other illegals, the only means by which the Soviet Union could get any military intelligence from the United States, because all their diplomatic means, all their open means would be cut off.
The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in your enemy's country, be it moral traditions, religion, respect to your authority and leaders, cultural traditions, anything. Put white against black, old against young, I don't know, wealthy against poor, and so on. Doesn't matter. As long as it disturbs society, as long as it cuts the moral fiber of a nation, it's good.
As one boxing great departs, another legend leaves the ring. 39-year-old Muhammad Ali loses a bout to young Canadian Trevor Burbitt. The champ calls it quits.
Just have to face it.
More information is turning up tonight about John W. Hinckley, Jr., the man accused of firing the shots. He was arraigned in court in Washington, D.C. tonight. There is no evidence that there was anyone else in conspiracy with Hinckley, that it all appears as though he was acting alone.
Good evening. At Christmas time, every home takes on a special beauty, a special warmth. And that's certainly true of the White House, where so many famous Americans have spent their Christmases over the years. This fine old home, the People's House, has seen so much, been so much a part of all our lives and history. It's been humbling and inspiring for Nancy and me to be spending homes have been assaulted. The Polish government has trampled underfoot solemn commitments to the UN Charter and the Helsinki Accords. It has even broken the Gdansk Agreement of August 1980, by which the Polish government recognized the basic right of its people to form free trade unions and to strike. The tragic events now occurring in Poland almost 2 years to the day after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan have been precipitated by considerable pressure from the Soviet Union. It is no coincidence that Soviet Marshal Kulikov, chief of the Warsaw Pact forces, and other senior Red Army officers were in Poland while these outrages were being initiated. And it is no coincidence that the martial law proclamations imposed in December by the Polish government were being printed in the Soviet Union. The action cannot stop there. I want emphatically to state tonight that if the outrages in Poland do not cease, we cannot and will not conduct business as usual with the perpetrators and those who aid and abet them. Make no mistake, their crime will cost them dearly in their future dealings with America and free peoples everywhere. I do not make this statement lightly or without serious reflection. We have been measured and deliberate in our reaction to the tragic events in Poland. We have not acted in haste, and the steps I will outline tonight and others we may take in the days ahead are firm, just.
This is my last broadcast as the anchorman of the CBS Evening News. Old anchormen, you see, don't fade away. They just keep coming back for more. And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6th, 1981. I'll be away on assignment, and Dan Rather will be sitting in here for the next few years. Good night.